Hi guys, it's Claire Nocti. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to introduce today the first video in a series exploring the most artistic and creative astrological placements. I'm going to go into some explanation of how I did this research and with what in mind, and the introduction is probably going to take a few minutes longer than usual as it was a way bigger research project than anything that I've done before. So if you're not interested in that, you can check the timestamps in the description box. So this might sound a little bit overwhelming at first, but bear with me. The arts are oftentimes classified into a few different branches: visual, performing, musical, and literary. First, I've done separate surveys on each art branch, and I'll list on the screen now the amount of people in each survey pool. The collection of the people in the surveys was determined based on lists from respected publications or award ceremonies such as art history publications, Oscar, Grammy, Tony, Nobel Prize Literature Award winners, and so on. Finally, I combined all of these art field surveys together to create a survey of almost 1,200 highly artistic people. 1,200 top creatives from across all the branches of art. And in that sense, this final huge survey would basically include anyone with available birth times who's considered majorly creative. A range of those whose art in some medium or form has contributed to the world, from Stephen King to Prince to Raphael. Basically, I'm pretty sure it encompasses anyone artistically prominent that would pop into your mind, as I really continued gathering birth information until I exhausted in each category the most influential hundreds of individuals. The reason that I've gravitated towards doing separate surveys of the branches as well as one large overarching survey of these related fields is because that makes it easier to identify which placements are playing a part in specific fields and art mediums, and which grant artistic abilities or profession as some kind of creative in general. Within the art branch surveys are even smaller surveys, for example 100 film directors. So with the combining and separating of surveys, I had the ability to narrow it down more and more, or expand outwardly more and more, in order to facilitate understanding of what succeeds specifically where. So this series will be similar to my mystical and magical nakshatra series, but it's literally 10 times bigger in terms of numbers of those researched. I will be weaving together a presentation that does include some analysis of the minor art branch surveys, but because my main objective was to share with you guys what I've determined to be broadly creative power placements in this video series, I am especially considering this survey of 1,200 artists overall. It's really interesting to see the differences regarding which artistic fields certain nakshatras can express themselves through best, but the most shocking element of this research, in my opinion, came in analyzing the strong creative placements that link all four of the branches of art together. So in this first video today, I'll be discussing and focusing on one key nakshatra and its function in the arts because it serves a very specific purpose. And in the next videos, I'll show a lot of the graph results and explore other nakshatras and placements. Like I did in my beauty video, I also weighted these numbers. So I found the top statistical factors within each survey that stood out, and then I ranked them. It's all weighted against one another to determine importance, and so that I'm sure to fixate on the right things. Because this was such a massive research project, I can't fit it all into this video series, especially many elements of going into deeper interpretation of the different specific art branches. The ebook will have a lot more unique information, so it will go into more depth of the differences between fields. For example, there was a field-specific nakshatra for every category that did well in one field prominently, even though it didn't come up as a nakshatra for overarching artistic ability. In terms of the nakshatras that showed prominence across all of the arts, however, there were 5 that I will be mentioning, and 4 of which I'll be exploring in some level of depth. Each of these 4 nakshatras hold unique perspectives that teach us all how to be creative and how to access our artistic strengths. For each nakshatra, there is truly a defined lesson, a powerful perspective on what fuels and ignites the human creative spirit and process. So as I go through the main 4, I will also outline their particular way of thinking that helped empower them to have contributed so much to the world's art, as well as the way that all of us, whether we have these signs or not, can benefit from contemplating their perspectives. The first nakshatra that I will be exploring was tied as the exaggeratedly top moon placement amongst 315 most influential visual artists, and then had enough consistently strong presence in all 4 different surveyed art fields to be the top moon overall amongst the 1200 creatives. Shatabisha Nakshatra. Shatabisha is key to explore when studying artistic placements, particularly in the sense that it has powered art innovation historically, animating its natives to construct and pioneer new and increasingly effective forms of art and media. Through technical innovation combined with creative imagination, with Shatabisha, art becomes a form of magic. Illusion is brought alive before our eyes in increasingly convincing ways. As Shatabisha natives build on the ideas of one another over the centuries, the visual arts become more technically effective at fooling us into believing what we are seeing, pulling us in and communicating to us the intended message and emotions of the artist. Shatabisha's spark has inspired individuals throughout history to grab an emerging medium and fuel it with the creative and inventive spirit that establishes it as an art form. They have flooded aesthetic intelligence into fields that were previously only technical or practical, as well as have flooded technical intelligence into fields which were mainly aesthetic, leading to a blend of the arts and sciences that pushes all of humanity into new creative territories. A perfect place to start the study of Shatabisha, and perhaps a great place to begin the study of art for this series in general, is at the time of the High Renaissance, defined as a short period of the most exceptional artistic breakthroughs and production in European history. Humanity was learning the technical mechanisms to represent 3D reality on a 2D format. The Renaissance calls to mind the title it inspired, Renaissance Man or polymath, an individual whose knowledge or contributions span multiple fields, often a title most respectfully bestowed on those who have skills that traverse the line between the arts and sciences. What defined the Renaissance as a period of breakthroughs was largely the presence of the 2 best-known and highest examples of the Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, whose names are very much linked together in the collective mind, and who both share the AA-verified moon placement of Shatabisha Nakshatra. Leonardo da Vinci was a painter but also an engineer, scientist, inventor, and mathematician. Michelangelo was a sculptor, painter, architect, and poet. Together, these 2 men created the 4 most famous artistic works of all time. The most famous sculpture is Michelangelo's David. The most famous paintings are said to be his work, The Creation of Adam, and Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, and the most reproduced painting of all time is The Last Supper. So Da Vinci brought innovation to the arts with knowledge he gained through scientific inquiry. He said, "Study the science of art, study the art of science. Develop your senses, especially learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else." And with this mindset, his late nights dissecting bodies informed his understanding of anatomy, which led to the production of far more realistic human forms and bodily movements onto paper. He studied optics and the human eye to understand how we see and the nature of light. He studied math to better understand perspective, symmetry, proportions, and geometry. With all these diverse understandings combining together, he brought fresh insights to painting, making it far more lifelike than ever, advancing the illusions of depth in an image. I'm going to explore for just about a minute the painting techniques that Michelangelo and Da Vinci developed or invented, which marked a major shift in art history. I wouldn't usually go into so much depth on the specifics, but I have found here that there are some symbolic understandings of this nakshatra that can be unlocked through contemplating these visual technical breakthroughs, and what they mean about how Shatabisha gains knowledge through constant close observation of visual reality. Da Vinci greatly developed something that you will come to see as a key mark of Shatabisha, chiaroscuro, meaning light-dark, using the contrasts of shadows and highlights to achieve a sense of volume. Through his studies of human vision, he then pioneered sfumato to further enhance chiaroscuro's effects, a technique for softening the transition between colors, mimicking an area beyond what the human eye is focusing on. He described it as without lines or borders, in the manner of smoke, or beyond the focus plane, and it means to vanish like smoke, calling to mind Shatabisha's smoky shadow planet ruler, Rahu. These new techniques applied together are what makes the Mona Lisa so famous, an early representation of the breakthrough methods that then became the standards of painting. Michelangelo is considered the greatest practitioner of cangiante, another of the four main techniques that emerged or greatly developed during the Renaissance. It is the changing of colors for technical purposes, such as using red to demonstrate darkness on a yellow object. The Shattebisha duo, Da Vinci and Michelangelo, were so linked even in their day that they were commissioned to compete by doing side-by-side battle paintings. It is said that they possessed a competitive and bitter dislike of one another, while also not being able to mask a true sense of admiration that they held for one another. This is yet another example, such as the ones I'm showing you now that I've mentioned in previous videos, of the way that our main rivals tend to be those who share our moon. Those who share your moon nakshatra are fixated on the same realm, standing from the same perspective, connected to the same divine source, and in that way are able to recognize your power in that realm better as a kind of enemy or competitor than anyone else can understand you. The competing individuals tend to scramble to hold a top position in a realm or field of their nakshatra. Even in cases when they didn't live at the same time, they battle posthumously through the collective mind and its recognition, where their names almost become synonymous with one another. So it was the ideals of Michelangelo that led to the following major art period, Mannerism, also known as Late Renaissance. Its second period was so influenced by Michelangelo that it has been said by art critics to have been a time where art was imitating art rather than art imitating nature. People so desperately coveted Michelangelo's work and his ability to portray a sense of awe and inspiring grandeur that young artists broke into his house and stole drawings from him. In frustration, he was quoted to have said, "Those who follow can never pass by whom they follow." While Michelangelo was the inspiration for this period, arguably the most notable artist of Mannerism was El Greco, another Shattebisha moon native, who held major prominence in the Spanish Renaissance. He was so competitive with Michelangelo that he was quoted as saying he was a good man but he didn't know how to paint, and that he dismissed his Sistine Chapel work to such an extent that he offered to paint over it. Just like the previous examples of rivalries, I quote, "And thus we are confronted by a paradox. El Greco is said to have reacted most strongly or even condemned Michelangelo, but found it impossible to withstand his influence." However, even having Michelangelo as one influence, El Greco had a very unique and individualistic style. In fact, it was so ahead of its time that some scholars claim perhaps he belonged to his own school. His art was more similar to modern artists like Renoir and Cezanne than to his own master from the time, Titian. Fascinatingly, the art movement following Mannerism was the Baroque. The painter with the most profound influence on this period was yet again a Shattebisha moon native, Caravaggio. He created vivid, realistic, intense scenes and portrayed extreme emotion through his work. He was most noted for truly mastering and exaggerating Da Vinci's work on chiaroscuro, pioneering a form of dramatic illumination called tenebrism, something El Greco also tended towards, which means dark, gloomy, or mysterious. He transfixed subjects in bright shafts of light and darkening shadows, utilizing violent contrast between light levels. He sparked a movement of his own, full of those who wanted to emulate his style, Caravaggisti. Of Caravaggio's major influence, an art historian wrote, "Ribera, Vermeer, Latour, and Rembrandt could never have existed without him, and the art of Delacroix, Courbet, and Manet would have been utterly different." The influential art historian Bernard Berenson agreed. He said, "With the exception of Michelangelo, no other Italian painter exercised so great an influence." And a well-known 20th century art historian said, "What begins in the work of Caravaggio is quite simply modern painting." Caravaggio's paintings were characterized by their drama. They feel almost cinematic with their ability to depict crucial, emotionally charged moments. As Protestant ideas were emerging, the Catholic Church began to feel threatened and wanted to use art to gain or maintain more followers. They commissioned painters to do works that would stir devotion, fear, and awe in the masses. Caravaggio more than met this challenge. He broke into new, higher levels of realism, both with his technique and stylistic choices, as well as portrayed more intensity in his work than perhaps anyone before him. This begins to shed light on the connection Shattebisha has to portraying subtle messages as such a pioneer in the realm of art. The arts throughout time have been funded most commonly to function as propaganda for religious or political purposes. Because we are now immersed almost every moment in media imagery, it's hard to imagine the impact peering at a painting would have had for perceivers at this time, and how much power and influence was in these images, how mentally and emotionally stimulating they would have been. But I will explore Shadabisha's association with propaganda and subtle messages in more depth shortly. So the Renaissance marked the transition from the Middle Ages to modernity, and these first three art periods were especially when the building blocks of technique were being developed. You can see through my citing of Encyclopedia Britannica here how stunningly Shadabisha moon natives are listed first, either as the primary artist or the developer of each of these three formative periods. Since I have explored an important progression of events in the early technical development of painting, I now want to go full circle to then reach the ending of painting as the world's primary visual art form. Painting initially had a very functional and practical purpose, the portrayal of realistic imagery onto a canvas. Even with different styles, subject matter, and layers of emotional meaning, painting always had an unquestionable, irreplaceable purpose and identity in being able to document visual reality in a way that nothing else could. So in the High Renaissance, when Da Vinci took a scientific approach to painting, it advanced greatly with this sense of purpose, and he became something of a first art celebrity in his time. However, with the invention of the camera, a huge part of the painter's function disappeared. It was said that painter Paul Delaroche even blurted out at the first showing of photographs, "From today, painting is dead." And Charles Baudelaire wrote, "If photography is allowed to supplement art in some of its functions, it will soon supplant or corrupt it altogether." Thus, painting as an art form entered into a kind of existential crisis, resulting in twisting movements, experimenting with all different portrayals on canvas, searching for purpose or finding new meaning, looking to do things that the camera couldn't do, such as to portray subjective emotion, abstraction, the passage of time, dreams, or imagination. One of the first movements to arise through grappling with this confusion was Impressionism. It sought to capture just a transient and momentary impression of something, weaving human perception more into the images than ever before and moving away from exact representation. Shadabisha Nakshatra always especially comes forward and shines when art is in need of some form of innovation, and when photography became a growing dark void in the field of painting, Shadabisha sought in a few different ways to try to fill that void. The oldest of the Impressionists was Camille Pissarro, who can have Shadabisha moon. The father of modern art, Cézanne, was primarily influenced by Pissarro. He referred to Pissarro as the first Impressionist and as God the Father, saying we all stem from Pissarro. I quote, "He acted as a father figure not only to the Impressionists, but to all four of the major post-Impressionists, Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Seurat." Speaking of Seurat, the art period following Impressionism was Neo-Impressionism, and some argue that it was the first true avant-garde movement in painting. The founder was Shadabisha moon native Georges Seurat. This period in particular closely mirrored the Shadabisha themes I have begun to explore relating to the blending of art and science. It was a movement that stemmed out of Seurat's desire to bring developing principles of optical studies, color theory, and human vision into the arts. Just as Da Vinci had done centuries before, he sought to flood a stagnating artistic field with revitalizing scientific insights. Through studying color theory, he pioneered the new techniques of divisionism and pointillism, different ways of keeping colors separated on a canvas, and instead allowing the human eye to mix the colors from a distance. So Neo-Impressionism was founded, I quote, on the basis that the juxtaposition of primary hues next to each other would create a far more intense and pleasing color when perceived by the eye and mind than the corresponding color made simply by mixing paint. Reflecting the Shadabisha polymath tendency to bridge art and science, I quote, "Seurat's artistic personality combined qualities that are usually supposed to be opposed and incompatible. On the one hand, his extreme and delicate sensibility, on the other, a passion for logical abstraction and an almost mathematical precision of mind." Clearly, this scientific approach resonated with fellow Shadabisha moon native Camille Pissarro. He then began to study Seurat and is noted as the only artist who went from Impressionism to Neo-Impressionism. Expressionism. Another way the invention of the camera was grappled with by innovative artists was through fusing decorative painting with the fine arts. Art Nouveau Shadowbisha moon painter Gustav Klimt, for example, mixed classic styles with something new and stylish. He became a massively popular artist, in particular for the sheer beauty of his paintings. His painting Woman in Gold is often interestingly called the Mona Lisa of Austria, and this, as well as his painting The Kiss, are two of the most recognizable artworks in the world. As said of Klimt, he was a revolutionary, but I quote, the opposite of the revolutionary artists that we see all the time in cinema. He's not a revolutionary artist in the sense of Picasso that tried to destroy and rebuild. He was trying to make connections. A crucial theme of Shadowbisha that I will continue to unravel in this video. Klimt became the best known of the Vienna Secession painters, often erasing the border between fine art painting and decorative painting to create a splendorous and new visual result. Interestingly, he was the first love interest of the arguably most famous artist's muse, Alma Mahler. She had moon in Shadowbisha along with her husband, the famous composer Gustav Mahler, with Shadowbisha moon and ascendant. Her later lover, known for his obsession with her to the point of making a doll of her, was the painter Oskar Kokoschka, who had Shadowbisha's son. Mahler, as a Shadowbisha moon woman with an artistic spirit and aspirations to be a composer herself, I quote, attracted only the most artistic lovers in her lifetime. She possessed a profound, uncanny understanding of what creative men tried to achieve, and a capacity to persuade them that they could do what they aimed at, and that she, Alma, understood what it was. What sheds further light on the artistic element to this nakshatra through its Shakti feminine expressions. So while some of these early modern art movements were inspired by the release from a functional purpose for a while, ultimately they were the beginning of an end. Painting's original raison d'etre had fallen out from under it, and that growing dark void eventually turned into a mouth, consuming and breaking the field apart. Pissarro's pupil Cézanne, who is the father of modern art, made the first moves towards deconstruction of the art form, beginning to break down perspective and form. As the camera became more accessible to all people, instead of further trying to innovate to solve the existential confusion that became painting, the whole field inevitably started to combust. I mention all of this because at this time of the sun setting on painting, in a sense, when the art form that had been carefully crafted and advanced was now being visually and philosophically deconstructed, there was a desperate need for a totally new sense of innovation, which is where Shadowbisha came full circle and entered again. As painting began to transform into something less oriented on the visual field and more oriented on the conceptual and mental plane, something amazing was happening with a brand new art form that would soon capture the adoration and love of the public for the 20th century: cinema. The video camera had been invented, and the first films, which were documentations of simple events, were being shown by the Lumiere brothers, one who himself had Shadowbisha ascendant. However, the brothers believed that showing clips would just be a fad, losing the public's interest sooner rather than later. At one of their showings was the Shadowbisha moon French illusionist Georges Méliès. Méliès saw something very different when he saw film. He immediately recognized its potential as an art form, asking the Lumiere brothers if he could buy one of their cameras. They refused him on the basis, again, that they didn't believe the camera held potential for such a pursuit, and so he reverse-engineered his own camera. Méliès was one of the very first individuals to use a camera to tell a fictional story, and the developer of almost all of the beginnings of what we consider editing and effects in a film, called the father of special effects. When you open a film editing program and can apply the two categories, transitions or effects, they have their roots in Méliès and his years of filmmaking that were packed full of rampant imagination and development. I quote theculturetrip.com. He created the basic vocabulary of special effects, manipulating and distorting time and space to create illusions of appearances, disappearances, using jump cuts and other complex special effects such as the first double exposure, the first split screen, the first overlapping or cross dissolve, fade in, fade out, stop motion photography, slow motion, and much more. He even added color to many of his films, hand painting each frame. He combined miniatures into his films films and combined live action and animation. With these techniques and showmanship, he pushed the envelope of filmmaking from mundane single-action shots to an imaginative storytelling vehicle. Where the Renaissance men enriched and informed the arts with science, with film Shadabisha crossed boundaries in the other direction, fecundating a new technical invention with an artistic spirit. In this way, the film camera no longer just served the function of portraying images. Its most elevated purpose became a means for human self-expression and storytelling. Just as the Renaissance men gave the world the foundational techniques for self-expression through painting, Méliès was the foundation of the techniques we use to manipulate film with our imagination. The clip of a rocket landing on the moon's eye from his film Trip to the Moon is one of the most iconic singular images in film history, and this film has been called the first great achievement in the history of cinema as an art form. What this image signifies for cinema shockingly reflects what Mona Lisa signifies for painting, a first primary fusion of all the brand new technical methods that would be tools for creative individuals to bring their wildest visions alive for centuries following. So now humanity really began to shift away from painting as we advanced the complexity and intricacy of the illusions into which we could immerse and onto which we could project our senses, create enthralling beauty, and entertain ourselves. Illustration and graphic design skills, of course, always have a place in reality and many commercial or artistic purposes such as through animation, but paintings or drawings in particular largely lost their ability to deeply captivate the masses in terms of entertainment. Quickly going back just a decade or so, I will visit the dawn of photography as an art form. So while in the late 19th century there was this question, would photography destroy painting? There was also the question, would photography itself ever be able to be a form of art? And most suggested that it wouldn't, and that it was just cheapening art. However, an early key figure, Henry Peach Robinson, wrote a book called The Pictorial Effect in Photography, being hints on composition and chiaroscuro for photographers. This book is said to be the most influential early writing on photography aesthetics and technicalities. Of course, it makes so much sense that Robinson was a Shadabisha Moon native. I quote Widewall's editorial. Robinson's main goal was to separate photography as an art form from photography used towards various scientific and documentary purposes. It's so shockingly similar to Méliès in the field of cinema. The pictorialism movement, which blossomed from Robinson's writings, was really the first to present the case for photography as an art. I quote, "Pictorialists took the medium of photography and reinvented it as an art form, placing beauty, tonality, and composition above creating an accurate visual record. Pictorialism refers to a style in which the photographer has manipulated what would otherwise be a straightforward photograph as a means of creating an image through an early form of photomontage combining different images together, so projecting an imaginative and emotional intent onto it rather than simply recording it. So pictorialism relied on this idea of photomontage or combination printing to first start introducing to humanity and acclimating them to the thought that photography could itself be an art. Robinson said, as music is only sound under governance of certain laws, so is pictorial effect only the combination of certain forms and lights and shadows in like manner harmoniously brought together, which also sheds further light on this Shadabisha tendency to set technical standards that define an art form. On a quick side note, while researching painters, I also noticed this cartoon by the Shadabisha Moon artist Daumier. This drawing caught my eye, called Nadar Elevating Photography to an Art, a lithograph poking fun at the eccentric and bizarre behavior of this photographer Nadar. Upon looking into this photographer, because it reminded me of Robinson, I discovered that Nadar had Shadabisha ascendant himself, and that he was another photography pioneer and considered a Renaissance man, a scientist, cartoonist, balloonist, writer, photographer, and more. He was the first to use studio lighting, similar to how Caravaggio pioneered tenebrism, a kind of studio lighting in painting, and he was the first to take an aerial photograph as well as the first to do a photo interview. And he was even the first man to exhibit the Impressionists, and thus he's considered important in both the fields of photography and painting. It is Ansel Adams who is often called the most famous or easily recognized photographer of all time. He had Shadabisha's son. Adams emerged out of the pictorialism movement that was so popular from Robinson, getting his beginnings within it. However, by 1925, he had rejected pictorialism altogether for a more realistic approach. So it was Adams who helped pioneer the progressive idea that instead, photography didn't have to be so manipulated or placed into photo montages to be considered an art. He insisted that the craftsmanship of the photo itself could function as an art. A famous quote of his illustrating this was, "You don't take a photograph, you make it." Another, photography is more than a medium for factual communication of ideas. It is a creative art. Two of the most key and recognizable staples of his photography are dramatic lighting and intense contrast, which follow the Shadabisha chiaroscuro themes. To maintain as much contrast from black to white as possible, he used black and white photography exclusively throughout his life, and is known for even spending hours in the darkroom, dodging and burning his landscape photos to further whiten the light areas and blacken the dark areas. He helped to found the group F60, a group which focused on defining pure, true photography as art. The manifesto being, pure photography is defined as possessing no qualities of technique, composition, or idea derivative of any other art form. All of these Shadabisha artists throughout the centuries emphasizing this fascinating black and white contrast is also even interesting in regards to my note a few years back, where I saw the way that these natives seem to constantly wear black and white stripes, something that I'd never have imagined then would have such interesting and deep roots to their nature in so many ways. On that note, around the same time there were big shifts in fashion as well, another visual art form. The Shadabisha moon native Coco Chanel was credited in the post-World War I era with popularizing a sporty casual chic as the feminine standard of style, replacing the corseted silhouette that was so dominant beforehand. She is known for largely sticking to black and white as a defining characteristic of her work. She's the only fashion designer listed on Time magazine's 100 most influential people of the 20th century and tends to top any list of the most iconic fashion designers of all time.
With the traditionally secretive nature of this nakshatra, it makes sense that Shadabisha natives tend to gain reputations as some of history's most enigmatic individuals. People tend to project the strong belief that the works of Shadabisha natives contain hidden messages waiting to be decoded, even centuries after the work was created. Likely it has to do with how ahead of their time many of these natives seem, relating to Rahu's rulership over the future, and this being the height of Rahu. It triggers curiosity and the imagination in viewers who begin to speculate that maybe the Shadabisha native left hints of things we're still yet to know, or that we don't yet have the intelligence to decode. Many speculate about hidden messages in Michelangelo's works, such as the portrayal of God within the shape of a human brain. Fascinatingly, there are 3 films which share very specific and unique themes I haven't found in any other films in this exact formula. Each of the 3 films mirror one another in shocking ways. These films are National Treasure, Hugo, and The Da Vinci Code. All 3 of these films are an interesting combination of fact and fiction. They are stories playing off of fantasies and speculations about real historical figures, especially the unraveling of a mystery that the mystifying historical figure left behind. In The Da Vinci Code, a college professor works to uncover clues about Mary Magdalene and Jesus within the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, who they say in the story, that plays off of real conspiracies, was part of a secret society, and that da Vinci was charged with protecting the true history of Christianity. The film plays, for example, with the fictional idea that Da Vinci invented a cryptex to hide secret messages. In his real life, he did use a mirror to write almost all of his private works so that it would be written backwards and in a shorthand of his own invention, which some speculate is because he was trying to keep his inventive ideas and discoveries from being stolen. The Da Vinci Code is often compared to National Treasure. In this film, a team of cryptologists and historians, played by Nicolas Cage and Shadabisha Moon native Diane Kruger scramble to decode a series of clues left behind by the Shatabisha Moon native Benjamin Franklin, as they uncover that it would lead to the location of the lost hidden treasure of the Freemasons and their predecessors, the Knights Templar. The film views Franklin as a defender for a secret society, just as the Da Vinci Code treats Da Vinci. The public's fascination with the mysteries of the Freemasons, such as the fixation of national treasure, is interesting in terms of their most recognizable symbol being their black and white checkered floors, and Shatabisha's connection to the contrast of these colors. On the note of Ben Franklin, in the defining paragraph of the Renaissance Man Wikipedia page, 4 men are mentioned, 3 of them being the Shatabisha Moon natives, as Benjamin Franklin, like Da Vinci, was noted for having invented many things while also being a politician, scientist, philosopher, writer, and more. He was a major pioneer in the American Enlightenment. So in this film as well, they view the Shatabisha native as a primary member of a secret society who hid clues in order to protect something, such as within letters Franklin wrote, as well as with a pair of colored lenses he left behind that allowed Cage's character to find a secret passage no one else could see, leading to underground treasure. The Da Vinci Code ends with his clues leading to the underground location of Mary Magdalene's tomb.
Another mystery.
The film Hugo is about a little boy who finds a broken and locked automaton, much like the ones Da Vinci is known to have drawn and created. The boy works very hard to fix the automaton and find the key that unlocks it. Upon finally getting it to work, it draws the famous scene of the rocket hitting the moon in the eye, and Georges Méliès's name is signed. In the movie, it's shown that it was Méliès who built the automaton. The movie is essentially a journey to uncover his secrets and genius, and the mystery of the way he and his films disappeared after the war. Similar inventive, artistic drawings by Georges Méliès are shown in the film, much like Da Vinci, with the beauty of intuitive casting as well. The actor who plays Méliès, Ben Kingsley, himself had Shatabisha Moon. Intuitive casting constantly reminds one of Jung in his insistence that we do not invent myths but experience them. Just as we are placed here to play divine roles in the great cosmic play, so too when we ourselves become creators and connect to our own creative spark, we unconsciously assign people to the same roles that mirror their macrocosmic roles. The same myths will arise anywhere, anytime, because they come naturally from within us and aren't even dependent on us upholding them consciously. An interesting side note on this relating to the elements of codes and cryptology in these films is that the poet Edgar Allan Poe, with Shatabisha Moon, had a keen interest in cryptology as well. He wrote The Gold Bug, incorporating ciphers as an essential part of the story, and was the first to use the term cryptograph. I quote, "The sensation that Poe created with his cryptography stunts played a major role in popularizing cryptograms in newspapers and magazines. There's also an odd enigma with Poe. His final work, called Eureka, explained and outlined the Big Bang Theory before it had ever been theorized. I quote, "He postulated that the universe began from a single originating particle or singularity, willed by a divine volition. This primordial particle, initiated by God, divides into all the particles of the universe." Poe also expresses a cosmological theory that anticipated the whole list of those things, which I will flash up on the screen now. Some modern critics believe Eureka is the key to deciphering meaning in all of Poe's fiction, that all his works involve similar theories. However, at the time, the public hated Eureka. Poe was so hurt by it that he wrote to his aunt, "I have no desire to live since I have done Eureka." He confided in a friend that he believed his contemporary generation was unable to understand it, but that it would be appreciated, if ever, 2,000 years into the future. However, even by 1934, Albert Einstein noted that Eureka was a beautiful achievement of an unusually independent mind. A Scientific American article by a Poe scholar outlines the domino effect that led from post-fiction work Eureka to the actual development of the Big Bang Theory. Another strange and mystifying Shatabisha twist of artistic expression and science, which also has connections to his Swati Nakshatra ascendant, if you've seen my video on that one. Ultimately, with this nakshatra, there is this constant theme that a mysterious and secretive individual from the past can lead the character of the story into a dark hidden area, mentally or in the physical world, in which they find some concealed reward, such as groundbreaking secret knowledge, or the treasure that symbolizes this. Less directly related to the themes of the first 3 movies in terms of using a real historical figure, but still similar in regards to an adventure initiated by the desire to follow the clues of someone shrouded in mystery, is Treasure Island, written by Shatabisha Moon native Robert Louis Stevenson. Its plot follows a boy working to uncover a mystery through a map and clues left behind by the infamous, mysterious pirate Captain Flint. 2 of the primary book influences on Treasure Island were Poe's Manuscript Found in a Bottle and The Gold Bug. Treasure Island is the novel that popularized mystery elements such as the map marked with an X and the treasure hunt concept found in National Treasure. In the Disney film adaptation of this story, young Jim Hawkins on the hunt for the treasure is played by a Shatabisha Sun native. In The Goonies, which was directed by Shatabisha Moon native Richard Donner, a young boy finds a map and leads his friends on a journey to discover the hidden treasure left behind by the notorious pirate One-Eyed Willie. And the little boy has Shatabisha Sun.
Just what if this map could lead to One-Eyed Willie's rich stuff? Maybe. Then we wouldn't have to leave the Goondocks. Come on,
Hey, Mike,
I don't
want to go on any more of your crazy Goonie adventures.
Guys, Linda, come on, where are you going? You don't want to do this?
Over a decade before Lord of the Rings, Shatabisha Moon writer J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, which he originally just envisioned as a children's story that follows the quest of Bilbo Baggins to win a share of the treasure guarded by Smaug the dragon. Even in Disney's Aladdin, Shatabisha arises regarding the treasure cave. The hidden treasure he enters the cave for, the magic lamp, contains a wish-granting genie, iconically played by Robin Williams, who has Shatabisha Moon. The early Western film Treasure of the Sierra Madre was directed by Shatabisha Moon native John Huston and based on a book by a Shatabisha Sun native as well.
So what is so interesting about Shatabisha as far as helping to initiate new and increasingly complex and engrossing art forms is its Rahu planetary rulership and its symbol as the circle. The circle largely represents boundaries, a connection to Shatabisha's ruling deity Varuna. Varuna was at one time the god of the order in all of reality, the sky and waters, but over time he became known especially as the god of the cosmic and terrestrial seas. In this way, the circle can be seen in that each body of land is surrounded by water on our earth, and so water becomes our boundaries. Varuna, as a protector of order, is said to have spies who watch all of the happenings on earth, an interesting contemplation in regards to the secretive, observant, and sneaky nature of Shatabisha, and its connection even to things like the FBI. Shatabisha is essentially the cosmic borders of the eyes and ears of the collective that help to keep things in order and shape. The strong connection to the force and the energy of the collective means Shatabisha natives gain skills through their constantly discharging mental nature and roving mind that ventures, without minding its business, into all areas of reality. It is undeniably gossipy, even the gossip queen archetype, so interested in observing the affairs of others from a hidden or whispering place that it often prefers to observe rather than be observed, and thus sometimes falls into an obsession with personal secrecy, or the hiding of one's identity. At the core of Aquarius, through immense interest in everything around oneself and little interest in oneself, Shatabisha is also known to sometimes become energetically sickly, and thus why diseases contracted in this nakshatra are said to be extremely hard to handle and are only healed in the extremely self-oriented nakshatra of Ashwini. Rahu rules information that we gain through our senses as the head without a body, and his hunger and inability to be satiated reflects the constant need that humans feel for mental stimulation. And that's why Shatabisha is not one to linger with outdated art forms, but to want to pioneer some new form of mental stimulation that is more complex than the previous one. In this way, Rahu is hard energy to handle for each of us, but also opens doors to his most rare and sacred expression as the ruler of technology and innovation with the power of uniqueness. In art, uniqueness is essential. When Rahu connects to Ketu through studying the past and finding its patterns, such as Rahu's interest in statistics, scientific inquiry, and things of that nature, he becomes stabilized to be able to actually fertilize and change the future. Within Within Aquarius, both Shadabisha and Porva Bhadrapada have significations relating to breakthroughs in different ways. As you know if you watch my channel, Porva Bhadrapada's is largely spiritual and philosophical, the breaking of boundaries not just for oneself but for everyone around them. And that breaking of boundaries leads to immense expansion. Shadabisha, as the force of the collective, however, merges and finds connecting pathways between boundaries to then create new ones, like the creation of a new art form that then encircles and consumes the senses and attention of those around them. And in that way, they help to construct and enforce boundaries. To understand the difference in how these two nakshatras deal with boundaries, you can imagine the Shadabisha Renaissance men who help to establish perspective, volume, and form to increase art's effectiveness relating to illusion by kind of imploring or inspiring everyone to abide by more mathematical structure, defined laws, and standards in art. Then contrast this to Paul Cézanne, who I mentioned was the father of modern art, and who first began to deconstruct this perspective and form, who had Porva Bhadrapada moon. Cézanne instead inspired the expansive explosion of mercy in painting, more literal shapelessness and freedom in visual form, a dissolving of roles or standards in art, and this wild, liberated, lawless territory that eventually led to a kind of Piscean dissolution that I've explored with this nakshatra. While the hot spot for polymaths is Shadabisha, which is fully contained within Aquarius, it can be seen that almost all art-science blending polymaths possess at least one nakshatra primary placement that's in Aquarius, as the Rashi which rules over the development of new technologies and advancements for humanity. The most famous author who writes on polymaths is Walter Isaacson. He has 4 books he calls the Genius Biographies, 3 of which are about Shadabisha natives Steve Jobs, Ben Franklin, and Da Vinci. Shadabisha as the key nakshatra of the polymath archetype really does make sense though with its circle symbolism. It's well-rounded through its unbounded attention to all areas. Shadabisha means 100 flowers, cures, stars, or healers, which can be considered in one way as the ability to, through so much observation, almost like Varuna's millions of spies or the collective mind, gain a huge range of perspectives and lenses through which to see reality. Because Rahu gains knowledge through observation, this then obviously also creates an intelligence regarding visuals and what produces convincing imagery that translates to visual art. Da Vinci is credited with some very early work on the science of contact lenses, and Benjamin Franklin invented bifocals. Da Vinci is also known for his insistence on the link between art and science relating to vision. That to portray images and know how to represent things based on vision, one really has to understand it, or what he calls Sapar Vidire, knowing how to see. Compared to other nakshatras I'll be exploring in this series, Shadabisha is not as invested in art in the sense of wanting to enjoy its senses or indulge. Instead, this nakshatra is truly devoted to developing how accurately we can portray reality through our art, and so ultimately that center of desire warrants greater necessity for the inclusion of science.
A title for Rahu is Mayavi, the magician, and Shadabisha is the force targeted towards developing the tools and technical tricks to create an illusion of experiences that move and influence us through the defining artistic medium of each century, whatever that may be. To learn the intricacies of the grand illusion in which we dwell, really the most important thing is just paying close, even obsessive attention to everything around you. That's why Ketu as a planet rules liberation and is headless, meaning void of eyes and ears, tending not to pay attention and not to attach to the grand illusion it is in. Rahu as our mental immersion into the illusion and our obsession with it creates individuals who often go on to create the mini illusions which are art. To reproduce something well, first you must observe it closely. You must know and obsess over each detail of it. You must be able to call out when anything doesn't fit into place. What is so interesting about the concept of the polymath is that, like the circle, they bring a range of developments or solutions from new parts of reality to fertilize previously stagnant fields with unique interdisciplinary insights. I quote, "They build atypical combinations of skills and knowledge across fields and then integrate them to create breakthrough ideas and even brand new fields and industries where there is little competition. They not only move between different spheres or different fields and disciplines, but seek fundamental connections between those fields so as to give them a unique insight into each of them. For example, studies have proven that those with quote-unquote too many interests are more successful. Nobel Prize-winning scientists are about 25 times more likely than average scientists to sing, dance, or act, 17 times more likely to create visual art, 12 times more likely to write poetry, and 4 times more likely to be a musician. Innovation largely and commonly comes through the merging of two previously separated and distinct fields. A person may think that the most skill and genius comes in spending years studying just one subject deeply, but what research and studies on the polymaths may prove is that the most innovation, creativity, and progress comes when instead you develop at least some decent level of skill in multiple fields, allowing the fields to feed off of one another in new ways, requiring you to diversify your experiences and even get used to using different pathways in the brain that aren't usually applied to some particular field. Shatabisha Sun native Steve Jobs was something like a modern George Méliès or Henry Robinson in his bridging of art and science. He also imbued something purely technological or mechanical with artistic sense and application. He is considered a polymath not for having greater skills in developing computers than his competitors. In fact, he's said to have somewhat less, but his power came in the way he brought aesthetic intelligence and an eye for design to software and hardware, phones and computers that hadn't been there before. He also especially marketed that his products would facilitate the flow of creativity and put more creative power into anyone's hands. He made Apple devices feel like the new tool of the artist and strove to make more creative use of computers for the average person. As the Renaissance men did for painting, Robinson did for photography, and Méliès did for cinema, he initiated a new era by giving the masses more tools to express their creative impulse in new ways. He was a huge catalyst in inspiring the mass use of photo editing or drawing software like Photoshop or video editing programs. Perhaps it was this intention to put more creative power in the average person's hand and let them easily share it with the world that was one of the catalysts that began to bring about the slow downfall of cinema as an art form, along with video games, which I'll talk more about shortly. So Shatabisha relates to pioneering the merging of fields and the creation of brand new boundaries as these fields mix and new perspectives are brought in. One of Steve Jobs' well-known quotes calls to mind Da Vinci's words on needing to connect everything. Essentially, of the nakshatra cosmic creative lessons I will explore in this series, Shatabisha's can be summed up in Jobs' quote, "Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it, they just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences they've had and synthesize new things." And the reason they were able to do that was that they've had more experiences, or they have thought more about their experiences than other people. Unfortunately, that's too rare a commodity. A lot of people in our industry haven't had very diverse experiences, so they don't have enough dots to connect, and they end up with very linear solutions without a broad perspective on the problem. The broader one's understanding of the human experience, the better design we will have. I think it's worth mentioning for a minute a bit more about J.R.R. Tolkien, who had Shatabisha Moon, and the way he's often called the father of modern fantasy. In writing Lord of the Rings, he poured into it the connective creativity and understanding of a range of things from literature to science to linguistics to construct a whole world that included its own mythologies, races, languages, and more. I quote, "He wrote about his intentions to create a body of more or less connected legend, of which the cycle should be linked to a majestic whole, and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. The hands and minds of many artists have indeed been inspired by Tolkien's legends. He was an early pioneer of the concept of world building, taking fiction to the next level, where you don't just follow a unique storyline, but mentally enter a whole constructed world. In fact, one new form of art and entertainment are video games, which I've explored previously, have especially strong connections to Shatabisha's Trine, the Rahu world Swati Nakshatra. Role-playing video games with open worlds are particularly immersive and a kind of replacement displacement or shift from cinema, as they are almost like cinema come alive, where you direct what happens and you have a position as a character within it. For example, reading Harry Potter is imaginatively satisfying. Watching the films is exciting, but as a kid, the pinnacle of entertainment you wish for is if you could enter Hogwarts yourself, live your own life and story there. While cinema overcame past arts through combining them all together, music, visuals, dialogue, etc., it is RPGs that are the natural extension of that, immersing our senses even more deeply into the story through giving us our own autonomy within the creation. It was Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's innovations with world building that seemed to inspire such a desire to immerse within a work of art rather than just to perceive and read or watch it, that two men created the first RPG, a board game called Dungeons & Dragons, which was originally so similar to Lord of the Rings that they were threatened with a lawsuit from Tolkien Enterprises. This later inspired the development and technical layout of the first RPG video games, which were playing off of Dungeons & Dragons setup and roles.
Shadowbisha is also called the favorable star of the king, and while not being the controllers of society generally, they tend to be involved in the creation of the art forms that are later used by people in positions of power to influence society, such as art's historical connections to propaganda that I mentioned earlier. Rahu is, of course, illusion, and as we evolved, those of us who pulled in and reacted to information quickly and assimilated it into our being and understanding of the world succeeded, and thus rapidly and hungrily pulling information in became a characteristic of the human race. Originally though, we were only interacting with real phenomena. Anything we would do would produce a real world result and therefore give us a real world lesson. Art, however, is an imitation of the natural world. With art, although most of it has to and does reflect reality in order to be convincing and enthralling, the writer or creator of the art can purposefully show a behavior and then show if it is rewarded or whether it is shamed or fails in the work to socially train you to act in certain ways or hold certain beliefs, and it doesn't have to correlate to reality. If you see the same message enough, you may then integrate that false lesson from that illusory reality into your unconscious mind, and it could influence your response to things in this reality. Rahu's devotion to reproducing reality and his inventions through time, they create stimulating artificial experiences where they increasingly reduce our ability to realize that we are perceiving an illusion, and thus we may integrate it more quickly into our own beliefs and behaviors. And that's even a little bit why there are more reasons than one on my channel that I try to promote being mentally active rather than passive when consuming media. You can learn so much through the mini illusions that reflect our world when you keep yourself very conscious while perceiving them. And in that way, it's not that Rahu creates propaganda or chooses the messages that will be pushed. He just has a passion for mental stimulation. So it's he who makes propaganda kind of possible from both the passive and active side of us. He's the part of us that frantically wants to consume stimulation, as well as the part of us that wants to pioneer new forms of stimulation. It's also interesting to think about Varuna's association with wine rolled by his consort Varuni. You need a vessel to contain what you're mixing or fermenting. Varuna rolls and defines technical boundaries. In productive creative fields, there are collective standards and norms that define the medium and become the artistic language that connects the art creator to the art consumer. Then with any good work of art, there's also a spark of individuality amongst each artist who play with these standards but in very different ways. For example, most effective painters use some form of perspective, anatomical drawings, shading techniques, etc. And most effective directors use some form of dissolves or jump cuts or split screens or slow-mo or anything, but their styles differ. The idiosyncrasy of a director almost never arises in them inventing brand new techniques, but applying the established techniques in a personal, unique way. Shadowbisha's tie to art is specifically in constructing those broad technical boundaries within which all types of creative spirits can then play. In order to allow boundaries to evolve and mix and be redefined, Varuna must have the power to traverse between them and connect them. them. In the Varna Shiksa, which outlines the attributes, colors, powers, and deities of each Sanskrit letter, the letter Va is attributed to Varuna. Its power is, I quote, annihilating relative boundaries through union with the unbounded field of pure intelligence, to keep an art form moving into the future and not stagnating. So wine is fermented within this boundary, but is a substance said to break personal inhibitions and get creative energy flowing. An interesting connection of alcohol to the polymath behavior is the way that alcohol is said to enhance creativity. Polymaths are said to be those who let a question guide them. They don't stop themselves from entering any mental territory, even completely new territory, to find the answer, which is interesting in regards to Rahu, as so hungry with desire for experience, as a position in one's chart that is new to them but that they are venturing into, and as the significator for the future. Alcohol's connection to creativity is said to be brought about in the way that, more often than we realize, we stop our thoughts from flowing and redirect them. We stop the flow of our own minds, judging a thought as stupid, and then moving our mind more in accordance with what we already know or the territory we're already familiar with. A small amount of alcohol is said to encourage us not to do this, but to let us travel down mental pathways further and faster to places our mind doesn't usually allow itself to go, before we block our thoughts' movements. And this then almost forces or activates an inner mind that is a bit more roving, probing, and investigative, like Shadabisha.
So Shadabisha relates to the boundaries and gaze of the collective, which keeps things in a defined form and structure. Great knowledge can be gained once one considers this gaze enough and essentially learns how to see through endless perspectives. Through one person observing and decoding reality's patterns and making some new connection, a light randomly sparks somewhere that begins a movement, pushing some old idea into untouched territory. When Rahu, the commander of direction, performs his positive and rarely activated innovative function of commanding our direction towards the future, the old ways shatter to such an extent that an adapt or die mentality is created within the field in which a new spark has ignited. Shadabisha comes full circle. It is most present in art fields when they are at their beginnings, and the innovation and creation of a new art form is by its nature the impetus for the death of the old one. Rahu's seed sound is doom, which has Davana Shakti, the power of obscuring while also preparing and protecting. Even the name Rahu holds this enigmatic concept. Ra means solar or creative, while Hu means shocking or veiled. An interesting reflection on Rahu's tendency to produce mysterious, shocking, or veiled creations, to shroud oneself in the impenetrable darkness of the future, ignite a mysterious light, and become a beacon of what is to come. Contemplating Shadabisha unlocks the idea that of course we are blinded by darkness, but we can also be blinded by light. Extreme light can be equally as veiling as darkness, and darkness can be just as revealing as light, as it is the contrast of shadows and highlights that allow us to distinguish form. This is why Shadabisha is the cryptic veiled star, but also a star of revealing. It reveals and yet is concealed at the same time. As a pioneer, its ideas are too new to be understood by most of the collective initially. They are perceived somehow at one time as a figure of so much light, yet associated also with mysterious shadow, like the sparkling gold hidden in a dark cavern. Shadabisha constructs new boundaries the collective does not yet realize are beginning to encircle them, but later they enforce. The veiling star that sets boundaries at its highest expression becomes a light bringer, creatively re-inspiring the collective and giving the masses new boundaries to play within. Like their paintings and aesthetic, like the meaning of the Renaissance itself, which these men defined, a time period that brought Europe out of its medieval darkness and stupor. Varuna is often associated with the night sky, the dark side of the sun, or the sunset. Shadabisha ignites a flame in the darkest areas, thus bringing something glowing, mysterious, new, shocking, and oftentimes initially rejected, into a dark realm. When you're the only light in a dark room, there are immensely dramatic shadows cast all around you. Only a handful of people appreciate the light at first, and they too begin to shine. More and more of the collective eyes see the increasing number of flickering lights in the darkness, and the little inspiring spark eventually ignites the roaring creative fire again through the whole collective. All different nakshatras then grab a hold of the newly innovated artistic medium, flood it with their diverse range of ideas, creativity, stories, and passions. Eventually, the room is warm and fully aglow again. I quote Edgar Allan Poe. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before.
Alright, well that was part 1 of this research study and I really hope you liked it. Don't forget to check next month for the full ebook including all of the graphs of the major study and the field-specific art studies and a lot more. And subscribe if you haven't for the next video of this series coming out soon. This is such a big project. If you enjoyed or benefited from my astrological research on this at all, please consider donating or joining my Patreon because I want to create an immersive experience with images and clips featuring and created by the natives of the nakshatras that I explore. My videos all tend to have those automatic YouTube copyright claims, and so I don't make money from views, but not that really with this niche information I'd ever make much money from views anyways, but I thought I'd just mention that for any of my subscribers who don't realize that this channel is really fully funded by you guys. It's only those who donate or join my Patreon that help to fund the creation of these videos. I appreciate any of you who support me in any way though. I see those of you who share my work or say kind things about it, and all of you guys are really the ones that I'm thinking of as I'm putting sometimes all the seemingly endless work and love into these projects. Thank you so much, I love you guys, and I will see you soon. A special thanks to my patrons, especially my Rayvati level patrons listed on the screen now, and a big thank you to my Abhijit level patrons, Ray, Ashley De La Cruz, Avnish Bangar, Shashi, Semya Hogan, Teresa Green, Maddie DRX, Kristen, Eric Linden, Tantric Tara, Carrie Dawn Brown, Karamsum Safehold, Lori Lane, Andre, John Welter, E, John Langston, Michael M, Jordan Andaluz, Bella, William Rivera, Jazz, Aiko, Juliana Sanz, Maya, Stephanie Cruz, Crystal Perales, Nikki, Angeli, Halima, Andrea Nicole, Rebecca Marie, Mo, Wes Denny, Una, Terrestrial Trash, Tanya Allen, Badrasana, Anja, Jurel McGowan, and Xtina. I love reading your comments. I can't wait to hear from you, and I'll see you soon.
I was so wrong. Sanir didn't want you to help guard the secret of the Holy Grail. Sophie, you are the secret.
Non, c'est pas possible.
You are the heir, the end of the bloodline. You are the last living descendant of Jesus Christ.